time of year in this part of the country in which the trees, deciduous trees, have lost all their leaves and look pretty dead. And it is a wonder to know that they are actually alive, dormant, to survive the winter. They are a symbol of what it means to be alive and dead at the same time, to accept the dormancy and darkness of winter as we should accept death. Forrest Church, a Unitarian Universalist minister, said that religion is the human response to the dual reality of being alive and having to die. Religion helps us through life and helps us fight anew the boredom that can come when we face the absurdity of existence. There's no other time of the year more potent for existential crisis than this time of year in the Northern Hemisphere, the time when the end of the harvest and we're bracing for the winter. Here at Two Rivers, we recognized the beginning of this season with a harvest festival where people brought in an abundance. And now we ready ourselves for the piercing cold with recognition that all good things must come to an end. The harvest, the season, and even our own lives. Celtic ancestors, before Roman contact and before Christian contact, had ways to celebrate the paradox of being alive and yet knowing that one day we will die. The season is when they would bring in livestock from the pasture and decide which animals would make it through the winter and which ones would be slaughtered. Which part of the harvest had to be preserved and which part had to be eaten. When the harsh winter would take the people they loved. They called it Samhain, the time, as we have said, the veil between the world of the living and the dead, the seen and the unseen, is at its thinnest. Now this was a double-edged sword. While Celtic peoples could welcome back their ancestors and left their doors open and hope that loved ones would pop in for a visit, it also meant that evil spirits would have to be appeased. And so they knew how to conduct many different rituals to ward off famine, death, and bad spirits. Bonfires were constructed and danced around to appease the spirits. Rituals were conducted in Stonehenge type of structures that aligned with the Samhain sun, rituals that are now lost to us. People feasted, eating what they knew would not make it through the winter, but not without leaving a plate of food outside to placate spirits. Villagers would dress up as something that they could not be recognized as, so bad spirits wouldn't be able to know them. We can see how these are the ancient roots of Halloween in the Samhain holiday. What you might not know is Samhain was also the time of birth for an important Celtic goddess, Galluck. She was the old hag with the powers of winter. There are many different stories about her. Some say she came at Samhain and left at Beltane. Some say she came at Samhain and turned it to stone at Beltane, and was reanimated to reshape the land at Samhain, creating snow, wind, and ice. Some said that the summer goddess and the winter hag were indeed the same woman, the feminine earth spirit that changed as the earth itself changed. Some say she was old woman from antiquity that had a staff made out of aspen, and that staff had the power to heal or to curse. And at the end of the season, she would strike her staff against the evergreens or holly and store her powers of winter there through the summertime. She taught the Celtic people how to survive the winter, how to grow crops that would be edible but not ripe at the start of winter, and to plant oats in the frozen February so that there would be food as soon as the earth thawed. For this reason, the last of the harvest and the first of the harvest was dedicated to her. She knew how to keep the living alive during the time of the dead. To disrespect her was to cross the other side of the veil into the land of the unknown. Now, of course, many of us know what happened to the pagans of Ireland. First they were Romanized, and then they were Christianized, adding pagan traditions and Christian traditions. Before 1508, Christianity celebrated All Souls' Day in May. This was when the Roman pagans had their ancestor worship. Perhaps a sign of Europe's growing influence over Christianity, All Souls' Day was moved to when Samhain was typically celebrated in European countries, so that it became a 3-day event in the Christian religion. The vigil and observation of the dead on All Hallowtide on October 31st, All Saints' Day on November 1st, and All Souls' Day on November 2nd. With Christianization and its patriarchal supremacy, the hag disappears. She's stripped of her power. She's made quite ugly, powerless, bitter, and a witch who will steal your soul. Death ceases to be part of life to be accepted. Instead, it is the start of your eternal damnation. Remembering your ancestors and asking them to share your hearth is forbidden. Instead, you are to pray for the souls that are probably burning in hell. Yet, Christianization of paganism offers a certainty. Medieval European Christians definitely knew what was going to happen to you after you died. If you were a normal person, you would probably burn in hell. Because the doctrine of predestination during that time was very popular. This was the idea that God, before anything was created, before time was time, had already selected those who would burn in hell and those who would go to heaven. And there was nothing you could do in this life to improve your chances of getting to heaven. Pagan things, natural things, and human things were sinful, many believed. There was nothing you could do to be saved. That meant you had to look for signs to see if you were indeed among the chosen. If you made money, maybe God probably liked you. If you had good health, perhaps you were among the saved who were going to heaven. If you were able to control your natural instincts and reject paganism, that might have been evidence that you were among God's chosen and would probably go to heaven. Now, as I continue to talk about evolving practices of death and remembrance, I must take a minute here and thank the Reverend Stephen Kendrick, who is a historian minister at the First Unitarian Church of Boston and has documented a lot about the evolving perceptions of death in Unitarians, and also the podcast known as The Pamphlet, which goes deeply into Unitarian Universalist history. Getting back to medieval European ideas of death, graveyards during this time reflected this belief of predestination and what was happening to you after you died. Since most people were probably going to burn in hell, there was little ceremony in the funeral of death. There would be little tombstones with a skull and crossbones on it, and a bunch of people thrown in the same grave. People were buried around the church or underneath the church. There was no more mystery. You knew what happened to the dead. When Puritans came to the New World with these same beliefs, it was a little bit more difficult to carry out. The churches they built up were not ancient, and they weren't set up to bury people in the basement or in the lawns next to the church. Unitarians then, who were still Christian, for sanitary and religious reasons, started to challenge our relationship to the dead. In the 1830s, the scandalous idea arose that maybe we would like to visit our dead, since they are probably not burning in hell. Transcendentalists who believed that nature was holy and that people were holy, and that we were not part of a pre-elect or predestination, started to rethink death and how it could be part of a life again. They began to construct cemeteries instead of graveyards, with the word cemetery being of Greek origin meaning to put to sleep. Cemeteries were a place of eternal rest, not the cast-off of your sinful body. Compare the root of cemetery to graveyard, in which the word grave comes from the German word meaning a trench. Unitarians in Boston built Mount Auburn Cemetery, the first of its kind, which combined the living and the dead. It was a living in that it was a beautiful garden and arboretum. It was in the middle of the city and was a respite from the hustle and bustle of Boston. There are rolling hills and stunning vistas, and the dead just happened to be buried there. It was also democratic. Instead of belonging to a church where you knew you'd be thrown into a pit because you knew you were probably going to hell, anybody could be buried at Mount Auburn. This radicalness is shown in that while William Ellery Channing is buried there, so is Harriet Jacobs, the black former slave who wrote Incidents in the Life of a Slave Girl. For African Americans and white people to be buried in the same cemetery during the 1800s was unheard of, but it started happening at Mount Auburn. It was a place where the living could come to commune with the dead again, a practice that had been lost for hundreds, if not thousands of years. Death for Unitarians started to regain its sense of mystery. Who knew then what happened after we died, how we rejoined great nature, and if there was a God planning all of this, or if it was a grand process that we will always just have a tiny glimpse into while we are alive. Force Church said that death is not life's goal, only life's terminus. The goal is to live in such a way that our lives will prove worth dying for. This is where love comes into the picture. The one thing that can't be taken from us, even by death, is the love that we give away before we go. So I encourage you to take a piece of the Samhain fire, and it seems like I have a lot, so come get some more, and put it into your own fire and watch it change colors. And talk to those you love even though they are no longer here. And not to be obsessed with death, but to accept it as a part of living. In our post-Christian religion, we are returning to our pagan roots. Many Unitarian Universalist congregations honor Samhain and contemplate the veil between the worlds. We send messages to the dead and remember how they lived. We celebrate the old hags and their knowledge that can keep us alive through the winter. We are again encouraged as a living to commune with the dead, not to be depressed, but to accept death as a natural part of life. Now we bring together the living and the dead.